Hello, everyone, and welcome to another CEMA webinar series. We're so excited to have you with us today. I think we're going to have a lot of interesting discussion, and we have a fabulous speaker with us. But before that, I want to do some few house cleaning things. First of all, my name is Kim. I am the Executive Director of CEMA, for those of you that do not know me. And I want to make sure that we get all your questions answered. So please put your Q&A or any questions you have in the Q&A spot, and we will also be monitoring the chat as well. But if you put your questions in the chat, we'll kindly ask you to push them over to the Q&A section. And I also want to remind you guys to save the date for CEMA Summit. We are going to be live July 25th and 26th at the Hilton Biltmore in Phoenix, Arizona. So please, you'll see those the registration go live next week. And we will have a digital component as well. So please, we're looking forward to having everyone there and can't wait to see all of you in person. And with that being said, I want to introduce our amazing speaker today. He's been a long-time CEMA member, a long-time CEMA friend, and we are so excited to have him, John Campano from Impact XM. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
So excited to be here.
Well, of course, and we are so excited to have you. And with that being said, John, I'm just gonna let everyone know so you don't have to say it. This deck will also be available to everyone viewing this afterwards when we push this up live on CEMA Online. So no need to ask that in the questions. He is willing and able to do this for us. And with that being said, Mr. VP, we'll let you take this over and take it away. Have fun.
All right, thank you so much. Really excited to be here. So hybrid, we're going to talk about hybrid today and the idea of kind of getting back to live, getting back to normal, although I'm not sure it'll be normal. It'll probably be the new normal. So really excited to be here with everybody, and thanks for tuning in, and hopefully you'll find some tidbits that are helpful for your own business. So jumping in, we're going to talk a little bit about where we've been, kind of what was going on in the past before we hit, the past year and a half of COVID and everything, and then where we believe we're going, and then some things to consider along the way. And I think, again, hopefully you'll find something interesting in here that you can bring back to your team and apply to your own work as well as you get back to normal. So with that, let's jump in. I think it's important to kind of remind everybody of where we were in the past before all of this happened. It seems so long. Sometimes, I think back and I'm like, how long has this been going on? It's been going on for over a year. It feels like 10 years. So the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is some trends and some things that we saw in the marketplace before this started, some things that have happened since. So when we look at the marketplace and trends, we look at macro trends. Those are those long-term, persistent things in the marketplace that are going on. And whether that's in the economy, in politics and culture, we really look at all that because ultimately it's all drivers of the expectations of our audiences and how our brand operates within that. And within that sense, we look at macro trends and we also look at micro trends. Micro trends are the things that come up and go away, and they may last a year, they may last 2 years, they may last 10 minutes. It really depends on what happens. And, certainly during COVID, there was a lot of micro trends going on, and we're seeing that even going forward. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then ultimately, the key to looking at both of these is they both can create or destroy value for our businesses and for our economy. So, paying attention to those macro trends, long-term demographic shifts, political shifts, everything that goes along with that, economic shifts, but also being very aware of what are the micro trends, not only what are the micro trends in the culture and in what goes around us contextually, but also in our own business. What are the new and happening things that you can apply to your own marketing efforts to drive your brand's awareness and acceptance? So in looking at that, one of the things we see with COVID is it really altered the pace and trajectory of many macro trends. If you kind of think about what was going on beforehand, even culturally and economically and politically, COVID came along and it didn't necessarily stop anything, but it certainly accelerated certain things and it decelerated certain things. And you can see that across many different trends as you kind of watch. It also kind of generated hundreds of micro trends. Some of those were, personal. I don't know if any of you guys tried to, bake some sourdough bread, or you had Zoom meetings with your family to celebrate birthdays. Those are all micro trends. It also obviously created a lot of micro trends in our own industry and some macro trends around virtual and what we were doing to reach our audiences and customers. So really important to kind of understand that context as we look forward. So for us, it's important to remember what was going on just before COVID hit. In 2019, McKinsey did a major study globally on the rise of experiences. And I'm not sure if any of you read this back then or even remember it, but basically the point is because of the adoption of social media and other factors demographically with millennials and Gen X and Gen Y and being more digitally savvy, this idea of experiences was taking off. Like the idea of like, if I don't tweet it or I don't Facebook it, Facebook Live it, it didn't happen, sharing with my friends, sharing with my colleagues. It was really driving a major push in experiences over goods. And so we saw like kind of personal consumption spending really increasing over goods. People were out there looking for experiences. And this really came through on the B2B side and the B2C side for experiential marketing. The numbers are really kind of off the charts with folks moving out of digital and digital only and into experiences, and experiences becoming really more important as part of an overall marketing playbook or marketing strategy. And of course, then there was COVID and we weren't really allowed or able, and certainly didn't want to have experiences. And so that really stopped that trend in its tracks to a point. Now, a side effect of that was that we all got to learn digital. If you look at the numbers, and this just came out of Hub and Untethered, a recent event that we attended, and many of you may have, is the numbers were off the charts as far as folks that had learned or experienced virtual meetings. And so this was, again, another trend that came into the market because of COVID. And I'm sure you guys are all experiencing a little bit of that fatigue. Here we are again on another Zoom meeting or another webinar. Hopefully it'll be entertaining. But for the most part, we spend all day, every day in some form of virtual meeting. Some of that is kind of a pain, but the other side of it is it really taught us what makes a good virtual event and what doesn't. And it also taught us the technology around reaching people digitally. If you remember back 2 years ago, I would imagine in most large companies, the digital guys and the event marketing folks didn't talk much and maybe didn't like each other because they were competing for those budget dollars. At the end of the day, now everybody's working together. And to be successful, we need to be working together. And going forward, that's only going to increase. So one of the major side effects for our industry was COVID caused us to learn virtual, learn best practices, learn how to apply that. Now we're kind of nearing the end, fingers crossed, we're coming out of it. And there's really some certainly kind of virtual fatigue, but there's also this incredible desire to get back to life. People miss each other. They miss connecting, they miss interacting, not only on a personal or social level, but on a business level. And so we've seen that. And if you look at the mix of a virtual meeting, which is probably mostly content and some connecting, and a live meeting, which is mostly connecting and some content, you can see the difference, but you can certainly see how they play in. So we think there is a really strong case for the second half of this year and the beginning of next year to get back to live events in a big way. Now, are we going to go, the big question is, are we going to go back to live events exactly the way they were before? Or will this new knowledge and experience and this new tool of virtual impact what we do? And so our sense of that is it absolutely will have an impact. We've all learned these new skills. We've all gotten these new expectations. We're working with new partners. We understand the marketplace. And by the way, remember that macro trend that I talked about at the beginning, which is demographically younger audiences that are coming up into the B2B world and in the B2C world. They're more digitally savvy than us old folks were at that same time in our lives. And so they have expectations too. So this combination of virtual and digital is, what we all call hybrid. We often get the question, what is hybrid? We'll talk a lot about that in a minute. But so from our perspective, when we read the market, we really do believe hybrid is the future. And it's really the confluence of all those trends that we've seen over the last year and a half and even what was going on before that. So obviously we're trained, we know how to do virtual very well now. I mean, us as an agency, we've participated in over 500 different virtual events in the last 14 months. So if you can imagine the volume and how quickly we had to learn, not only for ourselves as an agency or exhibitor or as a sponsor of an event, say an exhibitor live, or helping clients when they go to events as well. As I mentioned, the demographic and technology trends really make a strong case for this combination of virtual and live. And then ultimately, if you think about hybrid, if you take the connection and the engagement that's created in the live experience or the live event, and you add that to the reach of virtual, that really is the best of both worlds. And hey, we'll talk about data capture a little bit later, but also a very strong business case for hybrid. I mentioned it, virtual fatigue is setting in a little bit. Certainly we've been doing a lot of Zoom meetings, and it's not, we want to get out of the house a bit. I don't know if anyone's seen the ad that just came out for Extra Gum. If you haven't, Google it. It's a great ad. And I think it really captures the moment of how we all feel at this point about kind of getting back to normal. And ultimately, obviously, consumers, our customers, governments, we're all pushing to open as fast as we can safely do so. And the more the vaccine gets spread around, the more we're going to be able to do that comfortably. And so again, we look at the second half of this year as the key to when live is going to come back, and we believe it's going to come back as hybrid. Simple business case perspective, does hybrid make sense? Because it's going to be a little more complicated and a little bit more expensive. We absolutely believe it makes sense. Increased reach globally. Now you can have an event for 500 or 10,000 near your headquarters or in Las Vegas or in Chicago, wherever you might have an event, and you can reach a global audience with that in a very connected way. Extensibility, the fact that hybrid and virtual events throw off a lot of content, and you can use that content going forward for the next year to drive your content marketing, which is an important part of all of our marketing efforts. That's key to hybrid. Cost efficiency. It's probably going to cost a little bit more money, and we'll talk about that, to do a really great hybrid event over live only and certainly over virtual only. But when you look at a cost per attendee or a cost per engagement or a cost per touch, the cost efficiency is there. Your numbers are going to come down. And certainly measurability, anything you do virtually or online or with an online component is going to be more measurable. And then amplifying it during the event over social media, as I mentioned, that extensibility and that content you're going to create is really going to drive a lot of reach and a lot of engagement. And so ultimately, if done right, hybrid has a strong business case over virtual only or live only. Lower cost per attendee, that wider reach and the ability to amplify. And then at the end of the day, deeper insights, more knowledge about what your audience wants and needs and how to then market to them post-event. That's a much richer experience with hybrid. So we believe the business case for hybrid is really strong. Now, when you say hybrid, what do you mean? It could mean a lot of different things. We believe it will break into basically 3 different types of event: full hybrid, modified hybrid, and what we call hub and spoke. And you probably have heard some version of these, and different folks name them different things, but we're pretty clear on the differences between the two. So for full hybrid to us is it combines a full online event with a concurrent virtual event. So literally, if you imagine having a full event with an audience and all the things that go into that full event and broadcasting that event in real time with all of the things that happen at a virtual event and combining those two and doing them all at once, that to us is full hybrid. That's, you know, the creme de la creme. It's probably the most difficult and complicated and probably the most expensive, but certainly worth it if done correctly for the right audience with the right brand or the right messaging. And modified hybrid, a little bit easier, a little bit back to normal where we were. If you went to CS 5 years ago, they did a version of modified hybrid and have been, and other brands have as well, and other associations have as well, where you have the online event and really that's mostly the focus, but you take some key content and you may broadcast it out in real time, and then you take other content and you put it on demand afterwards for folks to watch and you know, share and the rest. So modified hybrid is kind of the low-hanging fruit of the hybrid world. We're seeing it a lot. We're seeing a lot of brands experiment with it. And so it's something certainly that if you get started, you may not want to bite off full hybrid, but modified hybrid is thinking about the folks that will show up at an equal rate is thinking about the folks that may not be able to show up and offering them an experience as well. Then hub and spoke, which we think is really kind of interesting. If you think back to the roadshow days where you might have 5 events over 5 months in 5 different cities to reach your local audience, that's basically hub and spoke. But imagine doing that all at once. So you might have a large event at your headquarters, but maybe there's still some travel restrictions. So that's a local audience because that's where your customer concentration and all of your leadership is. And then say your headquarters in Dallas and you have 1,000 people there. You might also have that same event going off in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, if those are customer concentrations on the same days at the same time, localized in some way, and then covered with a virtual overlay so that those are connected. So folks in Chicago may be sitting in a theater watching that keynote happen in Dallas, but they also are then walking out onto the floor and interacting with other audience members, other attendees, and other sponsors in a face-to-face way. And what that does is it's a great bridge strategy because it enables you to increase your reach and the volume of attendees, but not incur the travel expenses, not have anyone have to get on a plane and fly in a hotel. And for the near term, at least the next 12 months, that's a model that we think will appear in the marketplace and has started to, because it's a great bridge strategy to full on, having 40,000 people in one location again at some point. So an actual question is, okay, there's different formats. How do I pick my format? Well, you pick your format the same way you've picked any kind of marketing effort, is really you look at the brand and your organization's objectives. What are your business goals? Who are your partners? What's the audience? Who are your internal stakeholders? What are you trying to achieve with this event? And then you match that against your audience's needs and expectations. And again, if you look at the last year, that was all about virtual. And before that, it was all about live. Going forward, we think it's going to be a mix. It's a more complicated equation because some people are going to show up. They're dying to show up. Some people don't want to show up. They're not ready to show up. And so it's really understanding that audience needs around human interaction, what type of content and messaging, your partnership, your technology, and blending that right to pick kind of, the right format. That could be on-site. It could be virtual. We think it's mostly going to be hybrid, a lot of that. And then also the question of own versus sponsors. Are you hosting your own event? Or are you exhibiting at someone else's event? Or are you sponsoring other events? So those questions come into play. But really, the core driver of this should be strategy around your brand and the audience and the context in which you want them to meet, and really taking into view that the audience is now got a different psychographic than it might have had a year ago or during last year or even 2 years ago. It really has changed. So now you've decided you're going to have a hybrid event. You've picked your format. Now what do you do, right? So there's a ton of things to consider, just like there is with a very large scale live event. There's an entire list of things. And since we only have about 20, 25 minutes left, I'm going to go through them really quickly. And I'm going to try to give you kind of like some high level things to watch out for and think about as you go through each of these things. So building your event ecosystem, that's really the first thing that we think about when we work with a client and event, is like, what do we need? Who do we need in the room to make this a successful event? And if you think about a live event first, you've got your core team, and maybe it's the marketing team, maybe they're combined with the sales or line of business teams. But ultimately, you have leadership has a stake, legal and finance. You might have a partner agency or more than one partner agency. You've got the facility management or the hospitality management for where you're going to have the event. You might have an event logistics or a DMC working with you. You've got content management. You've got food and beverage. You've got all these elements of throwing a large scale event. Now, if it's a smaller event, some of these peel off, but in general, it can get very complicated. Now, certainly some of your partners may cover off more than one of these things, but ultimately at the end of the day, you need folks to understand all this. When you add in that virtual layer to make it a hybrid event, it gets even more complicated. You got to talk to your IT guys. You got to get them involved because they're the experts. You might have a digital agency you're going to bring in, or a social or content agency that you're going to bring in. You're certainly going to look for a virtual event platform. You're going to probably do some broadcasting. So maybe your live production team does broadcasting, maybe they don't. So it gets a little bit more complicated and needing to build out your core ecosystem. And this is really the first step, is who do we need to bring and get involved in order to make this success? So that's really the first question to ask as you move forward. So planning timeline, when you think about when do I get started? Well, of course, it scales to the size of your event. But in general, if you're doing a large scale proprietary event, you're probably planning 8 to 12 months ahead of time. We've all probably experienced this if we've done large events. The event just ended. The teams reported back to leadership that it was a successful event. Everyone goes on vacation for 2 weeks. We come back and we get ready for the next year and the next event we have. So that's a very kind of typical cycle for these large scale proprietary events, as well as maybe the largest trade show you go to as a brand or something along that. Looking at virtual, it's probably a much shorter timeline. It's probably more like 4 to 6 months. So folks ask us, okay, well, if we're going to do hybrid, those timelines don't line up very well. And you're absolutely right. Our recommendation is stick to the live event timeline for hybrid. It will force you to make some decisions earlier than you might have otherwise made on the virtual side or the virtual components of the event, but it's better to be early on virtual than be late on live. We've all experienced those last minute deadlines that crush us, crush the team, crush our partners. So it's really easier. It's better to be early. Sometimes it's hard to get the attention of the business units or sales leadership or leadership in doing that. But it's really important to be early and not be late on this, because you're probably doing hybrid for the first time. You've done a lot of live in your career. You've done quite a lot of virtual in the last year, but now it's hybrid, and you're going to learn along the way, and you're going to be picking partners along the way. So our core advice on this is start early. Better to start early and change things as you go than it is to get late and kind of like hit that limit of what you can do creatively or innovation wise or strategically, because you don't have time to do it. In thinking about budget, which is akin to timelines, is what we're seeing in the marketplace as we produce these events or participate in these events is some costs go down, some stay the same, and some increase. So just to give you a sense of what to watch for, if you think about most of your kind of cost per attendee and your variable costs, some of those go down in hybrid because you're probably having a smaller percentage of your audience live. Now, if you were having a 40,000 person event and 40,000 people are going to show up, then these costs are probably not going to go down. But if you're having a 40,000 person event and it's hybrid and only 20,000 are going to show up and another 40 or 50 are going to be online, those are the type of costs that are going to go down. There usually is a per attendee cost. And certainly if you think about entertainment, hey, we had that big closing concert. Well, maybe people aren't quite comfortable going to that big closing concert. So you're going to reinvent what that format was, and it's probably going to cost you less money than hiring, Gwen Stefani for the big closing concert. Eventually we'll get back to that, but I'm not sure we're going to be back to that in the next 6 to 12 months. Similar costs, registration and fees. You register somebody online or live, it's not going to change. Those even may go up a little bit if your audience increases, but that's worth, obviously. Live production is going to be similar. You're going to have your main stage production, your other production elements. They're not really going to change that much. Sponsor fulfillment is going to generally cost the same. An exhibit booth is an exhibit booth regardless of the size of the event. Certainly on-site activations and also space rental. Now, a lot of people say, well, the event's going to be smaller live. Why aren't I saving money in space rental? Well, our watchword for the time being, for the next 12 months, is half the audience requires double the space. So in general, your space rental is probably not going to cost you anything less than it costs. And there's also some pressure in the marketplace around inflation that you're probably going to end up around where you ended up, even if the event has a slightly smaller footprint. And then things that are going to certainly be a little bit more expensive, strategy and creative, and certainly digital strategy and creative, because now you're not only doing a live event, you're doing a hybrid event. There's just more of that strategy and creative required. Your virtual event platform is going to be a cost that you're going to incur that you wouldn't have with live only. And then certainly broadcast production. That's probably your biggest cost driver on doing hybrid, right? Especially if you do full hybrid. So if you're doing full hybrid and you're broadcasting that out and you're kind of thinking like a broadcast executive, which is really where the mindset needs to be, there's certainly going to be some cost there. Well worth it in most situations, because you're going to get that incredible reach, and you're also going to get all that content to use for your marketing for the rest of the year. So important to understand that from an ROI perspective, you'll be spending more, but hopefully you get a better return on that. So when we talk about agenda as the next topic, again, we go back to kind of full, modified, and hub. And if you think about it, I'm not specifically, what your agenda should be, but when you think about it, if you think about what is on site and what's online, when you do hybrid, it's pretty much the same content. And it's going to overlap. It's going to overlap from a time perspective. The online component will be live, and then it'll go to on demand, but it's basically, it's one agenda. For modified hybrid, you start to see there's probably the driver is your on-site, and then there's some online content, and there's some hybrid things like, hey, we're going to broadcast out the main stage, but we're not going to broadcast out all the breakout sessions because of the cost involved. But we will tape those and make them available online afterwards on a select basis. So you kind of understand the way the agendas can be driven by live, but overlap a bit with the online. And then the hub and spoke is really about setting your priority around that main on-site, having the local content also available, and then doing a virtual overlay and letting the main location drive the agenda. Now, as you're doing this, you've got multiple people in multiple time zones. It's not one event in Vegas or one event in Chicago or one event in New York. Maybe the main event is in Dallas, but you've got people from New York tuning in. You got people out from LA. So we often recommend kind of time shifting a little bit. Maybe you're anchoring in the central time zone, but you're starting an hour later than you normally would to accommodate not only a full national audience, but a global audience. So it's just thinking through that. And you guys might be like, you know what? We're doing Eastern time zone and damn the torpedoes, and people will show up when they show up. That's fine too, if that's right for your brand and your audience. But we do say consider kind of time shifting a little bit to hit that middle day part where most of your audience can tune in comfortably. I've been in, excuse me, I've been invited to several meetings that, since I live in California, start at 6 a.m. my time, and I reluctantly go, but I also note in the survey my dissatisfaction with starting, a main stage production at 6 a.m. So just keep that in mind as you go. So how do you choose the right platform? So this is for the virtual part of your online, of your hybrid event. So if you Google virtual event platform, many of us probably have done that, you'll see that you get about 760 million results. So how do you pick the right one from that? So certainly there's probably an RFP process you go through, and there's some of the normal names you can see up there that might be bidding, or you might be already be partnering with. Some of these folks may be doing some other component. Maybe you're with Zoom already, and now they've come to you and said, hey, we've got a full suite of online meeting software you can use. It's not just video calls. And so there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace, a lot of terrific players. We certainly have our favorites. We've partnered probably with all of these for different formats. Some of them are really good at full meetings. Some of them are good at smaller internal meetings. So you'll go through that process. The one thing we would say is beware of the customization trap. What we've seen in the marketplace is some of these brands and these companies were full virtual online event platforms before COVID ever happened, and they did it quite well. During COVID, a lot of players came into the market, a lot of big tech brands, a lot of webinar companies, a lot of video conference companies. I'm not naming any names because I love them all, but a lot of them came in with some version of a virtual event platform. And often they're less expensive than the full suite platforms that you might get from a Meeting Play or an Intrado or a Six Connect that have been in the marketplace. So when you do your RFP and you're auditioning these folks, it looks like they do the same thing, and it looks like they cost less. The trap there is, if you've ever installed a new ERP at your company, you know that the base cost is X, but the customization cost can be through the roof. So most of these players have come into the market with the basics of what a virtual event platform is, but by the time you add in all the bells and whistles you're going to want, they will be just as expensive or more expensive than the more turnkey software players that were in the market long term. So again, I don't know which one is the right one for you and your events, but take a look at them and really understand them and ask those kind of questions about, what am I getting with what I'm paying, and what am I going to have to pay for after? Really important to ask those questions as you go. So something else that's become really important, and we kind of all experienced this at the beginning of last year when COVID hit, was risk management and risk mitigation. So certainly if you're hosting an event is really important, but it's also just important if you're just attending an event or exhibiting an event. These things are important. Get your legal folks involved really early with your planning cycle and make sure you understand what the workflows are that are related to that side of it. Really, really important to have the right waivers, to have the right insurance, to have really clear escalation planning. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And then certainly if you need, go out and find an expert in the whole kind of COVID thing for the next year. A year from now, maybe not as important, but right now, you don't need to be an expert in everything. There are folks that really do this. There are companies that help. There are agencies that have a really expertise great expertise because they've done it a lot. But go out and get some help if you don't have it internally to your company, and find folks that can advise you of the risk and help you mitigate risk in this area. Really important to start that early in the process. So that leads us to kind of like training and pre-event planning. So, we all participate in this. We're having an event or we're going to an event. We train up our brand ambassadors and staff. We know our objectives are. We know what the sales team is going to do, what the marketing team is going to do. It's become way more complicated than that in the last year. So certainly just the regulatory environment around federal, state, local, or environment or location regulations is really important. So really understanding them early, because they're going to either allow you to do certain things and not allow you to do certain things. And you want to make those decisions and really know. It's what we refer to as being brilliant inside the box. We're all in a box here. We got budget, we got timeline, we got regulations. The idea is to have a brilliant event inside those regulations or inside those restrictions. Also, training the team. How do you answer questions that might arise? How do you troubleshoot? What's the escalation policy for when something happens? How do you clean and disinfect it? And I'll talk a little bit about that in a slide or two, but that's completely changed from how it was before. And then PPE, are we still distributing? Is everyone wearing a mask? Are we not wearing a mask? Are we handing out little bags with, gift bags with hand sanitizer? These are all things that you consider along the way to hybrid, at least for the time being. And again, that leads directly into kind of the idea of health and hygiene. We believe the number one goal of any event organizer is to keep people safe for the foreseeable future, right? You don't want to have a super spreader event at your event or experience at your event. So really thinking through how to do that is key. It's important. And it goes to every element of the event that you're going to have or you're going to attend or exhibit at. The next most important thing, and this is what I mean by what's changed in kind of the cleaning and disinfecting aspect, is to make sure people feel safe. So it's really important to keep in your pre-show marketing, your pre-event marketing, the right message points that people know you're taking care, you're thinking about these things, you've got their safety in mind. And then on site, increasing the visibility. It used to be the cleaning crew would come in after hours when nobody was around and clean up, and then the next morning we were good. What we're really seeing is now the cleaning crew comes in 3 times a day with a bottle of Windex or a bottle of bleach and cleans right in front of everybody. A little bit of an inconvenience, but it's a reminder to your attendees and your staff that you really care about them and you have your best interest in mind. So some of the stuff that we used to hide is front and center now, and we think that's the right approach. And of course, you'll customize that to your brand and your needs, but certainly something to think about. And then, what's the signage? Are we wearing masks? How many hand sanitizing stations? What's the PPE? All that stuff you really have to think through, and you have to make the right decisions for your brand and your environment that you're creating. So that leads you right to staffing. Like, we used to send 40 people to an event. Are we sending 40 people? We may not be. Are we putting people on planes to go to these events? We're probably focusing more on local talent or local sales staff and that type of thing. So thinking through that. So everything from reducing density to health screening before an event or of the staff ongoing. These things are all going to be important for the foreseeable future. Eventually, I think they'll go away. But certainly if you're doing a hybrid event in the second half of this year or the beginning of next year, these are really important things to keep in mind and plan out well that we kind of didn't have to worry about 2 years ago. And that leaks into every aspect of your event. Can you segment the audience? Instead of having 500 people on one day, can you do 250 people on 2 different days? Can you afford to do that? Will it create the same experience? Do you have to increase that floor space? What type of signage and messaging do you have to have everywhere to remind people of safe activity and important messaging? How do you communicate before, during, and after the show? Think about food and beverage, we'll talk about in a minute. Space seating. It used to be 8 people at a table during lunch. Maybe it's 4 people at a table, the same round top now. And then certainly traffic flow, one directional traffic flow, all the things you've seen out in the marketplace. These are best practices to apply to your thinking for your event and are really important when it comes to hybrid, certainly for the next year. One of the most important parts of making a great online experience at a live event for your online audience is this idea of broadcasting experience. So we used to kind of think like event producers. Certainly we need to leave that hat on, but we need to match it with a content programming. So if any of the folks in the audience has been a producer at ESPN or CNN or Fox, and you understand how to produce, say, election night coverage, or the ESPYs, that's what we're talking about when we talk about hybrid or true hybrid. So really understanding that and finding the right partners is how are you connecting the online audience, which could be significantly larger than your on-site audience, to that on-site experience. The other thing is when we used to do that, it used to be, hey, those audiences are very separate. What we see is if you do this correctly, you're going to create a lot of FOMO, fear of missing out, in your online audience. And it is going to be a driver of getting folks to show up the next year and the year after that and the year after that when things are safer and nobody's worried about COVID anymore. So, this year in September, it might be an event for 1,000 people that's broadcast out in a really robust way and 9,000 people tune in. That's going to drive your attendance next year because people are going to see it and they're going to want to be a part of it. So doing this right is really the key to long-term success in this kind of hybrid model and marketplace. And if you don't have the expertise internal, go out to the marketplace and find someone who really understands how to do this. There are costs associated. This is probably the biggest ticket on the new elements of what you're doing, but really important to do it well and do it in an entertaining and engaging way to connect those audiences, and especially that online audience, to the on-site activities. Food and beverage and hospitality, as I mentioned really quickly, thinking through kind of traffic flow. This used to be, an afterthought. You picked the menu and you had a food and beverage partner and they were great and they were going to handle it. Really important to think through the risk mitigation strategies around this. Is how are we approaching this? Is it single servings instead of buffet? How are we approaching the line flow? Everyone comes to lunch at the same time. What are we serving? What type of food and how we're serving it? The seating and spacing I mentioned, maybe it's 4 people at a table instead of 8 people. Is there plexi and acrylic everywhere? What's the signage? And doing it in a way that shows people you care and you were thoughtful, but doesn't get in the way and make it feel like, oh my God, I'm in a hospital ward, right? You don't want to have that experience, especially around the food and beverage and hospitality at your event, but really important to work through and think through these things in this element of what you're doing. Pricing, we get a ton of questions about pricing. So adjusting your pricing strategy to enable on-site and online. And really the important thing there is to think through the idea of customizing pricing for the experience, but not cannibalizing. You do not want to set your pricing so that you incentivize people not to come. You really want to keep that in mind, that there are some folks that are on the fence and you want those folks to show up. So when you build your pricing model from top to bottom, early bird to last minute, you really want to think through that as, where am I pricing this event if it's not, invite only and free? If there is pricing involved, how am I pricing it? And how am I allowing people to be online at the right price, but I'm not incentivizing them to stay home? And so it's matching that and thinking through that kind of thing. That leads right into sponsorship pricing and benefits. One of the biggest challenges we faced in the marketplace was exhibitor kind of dissatisfaction with the virtual model. Is, folks went to virtual meetings and are still going, but nobody really wants to visit the virtual exhibit hall. And a lot of events were trying to maintain their pricing from before the show. And there really was a disconnect in the value that was delivered to exhibitors and sponsors in a lot of sense. So we used the 1-to-3 ratio. 1 live attendee is worth 3 online attendees. We work that into pricing when we work with clients. And we also try to come up with a lot of different ways to engage that online audience and connect them to sponsors and exhibitors. And if you do it right, you can probably maintain your pricing based on your audience expanding online versus the in-person footprint, but also kind of reconsidering that and reevaluating what you need to do as you move out of virtual and into hybrid. Obviously, prices are going to come back and costs are going to come back, and there's going to be that value there. Now, the interesting thing about hybrid is, again, the number one challenge in virtual was this kind of driving exhibitor value, but there's a way to combine in hybrid to kind of get back to the best practices of onsite and really driving back that value around booth traffic and lead generation, all the things it does. We do there, but also doing some things online to drive in more value. And so if you used to have a 10,000 person event and that's going to be 5,000, the sell to the exhibitor side of the business and even the brand that's investing in that is, hey, we're going to have another 15 or 20,000 people online. You're going to be able to reach them directly. You're going to get great data on those folks as well. So just matching that and understanding that you need to be strategic and flexible when you have those conversations on both sides. If you're an event host or if you're a potential exhibitor at an event, thinking through that. Certainly analytics and measurement, really important, really terrific KPIs and metrics. Hard to get online. You could get booth scans, you could get the registration list, you could do some exit interviews. We've even seen some, tracking of cell phones and some facial recognition stuff going on. But generally, getting really good data at on-site meetings, it was always difficult and was always a challenge and was always kind of clunky. Now, when you add an online component to it, it's really much easier. It's Google Analytics or some analytics suite, Adobe Analytics, right? So it adds a ton more data points and a ton more data. Now, you can certainly get data overload. So you got to do a little bit of work to really figure out how those data points match up. And as we said, what is an on-site person worth versus an online person worth or attendee? But really important that hybrid is a very data-rich environment. And so that's great for driving insights and driving improvement over time. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was extending the experience. So I mentioned this earlier, which is hybrid or virtual events throw off a ton of content, and that content can be used for the rest of your year or the next whatever amount of time it's appropriate in. So for your marketing, your content marketing, which is a huge driver, especially in B2B as well as B2C, it's a huge driver. So if you think through that lens, pre-show in your planning is what type of content can we throw out there or create as an after kind of effect. How do we then filter that through post-production to make it like kind of snackable and aligned to what we want to do from, and as we say, kind of the real-time content, the broadcast of the event, what's on demand, and then what can last even longer. And then you filter that through all your touch points. You can really see how you can extend that experience and that investment in that event for a very long period of time. And it used to be maybe, hey, we had a couple of videos online after the event. Now it can literally be an entire driver of your ongoing content strategy for the remainder of your year or whatever fiscal period. So those are some of the things to think about, and I'm sure there's more. I'm sure I left a few out as you think about coming out of virtual, where we've been for the last year or so, and moving back into hybrid. And so it really is kind of what we believe will be the best of both worlds around what live gave us in that engagement level and that face-to-face connection we can create, and then the terrific content of virtual, and marrying those in a format that is really going to drive value for our businesses going forward. So one thing before we turn it back over to Kim and some Q&A was I wanted to mention we do have a virtual event coming up in June. We're hoping it's the last virtual event we'll all have to attend as we get back to live. But I wanted to let you guys know it'll be our 15th anniversary. We've got great speakers, Adam Grant from the Morton School, Tiffany Bova from Salesforce, and 40 or 50 other speakers. And it's going to be a terrific event. If you would like more information, please visit the website. If you would like to attend, if you email me directly, I will get you a free pass. So anybody that attended the webinar today, just email me and let me know, and I'm happy to get you a pass. It is going to be a terrific event. So thank you with that. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Kim. I think you're on mute, Kim.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I get used to this after all these years, all these months of doing this. So that was some fabulous information. I had a couple things that came to mind. You did the hybrid over time. You don't want to start Pacific time, but what do you do when you have all those different scenarios? Say you're doing all those three, well, not all live, but you're doing a hybrid approach. We're doing hub and spoke. How do you handle all the time changes globally if you're doing it?
Well, we've seen a couple of different ways to do it. So one way that we've seen it is anchoring in a time zone. So you understand your audience and the distribution of your audience, and making sure that you're saying, listen, our audience is distributed all over North America. We're going to anchor in the central time zone, and we're going to start at 10 a.m. Central, and we're going to run to 4 p.m. Central, and we're going to cover the event. If it's a global audience, what we've seen more often is a rolling time zone. So we're doing the North America version, and we're doing the Europe version, and then we're doing the Asia version, and we're kind of running them, almost what we called follow the sun. We used to call that follow the sun when we did those. And back in the day, we did quite a lot of those for some of the large tech companies. And it was exactly that. We followed the sun. So the event started at 9 a.m. on each continent, and we went from there.
Wonderful. And I know that this has been a whole thing. Our attention span is 0 now from being abused by digital. And going back to live, though, it's a big concern because we are used to having short bites of content. What do you see out there as the minimum or the key area for the live speaking engagement now?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right in that the audience at live will stick with you longer than the audience in virtual. So when we were in live and we would do an hour-long keynote, in virtual, that became 15 or 20 minutes. When you did a half an hour or 45-minute breakout session, that became 8 minutes. So it's really balancing that. So if it's a high-level speaker, if you've got, Michelle Obama showing up or, whoever, people will tune in for an hour. And so it's really understanding your audience and your speaker. Maybe that's main stage and keeping it fresh. When you go to breakout sessions, making sure that it's a little bit shorter when you're marrying. Maybe breakout sessions aren't 50 minutes with a 10-minute break anymore. Maybe they're 20 minutes with a 5-minute break, or maybe they're 30 minutes with a 5-minute break. And so it's adjusting a little. What's important though is, where is your audience? Where's your core audience? Are you playing to the on-site audience because that's much bigger? You've got 10,000 people on site and then you've got another couple thousand online, or is it 1,000 people on site and 50,000 online? You're going to want to play to that audience. So it really goes back to that slide where I talked a little bit about brand objectives and the audience needs and expectations, and balancing those. I will say exactly what you said, which is online, shorter is better. Short, snackable, quick. People don't want to sit here, as probably example by this thing is, who wants to sit with me for an hour online?
They're doing a pretty good job of it right now, so it's good.
Thank you. Doing the best I can.
You must be compelling, my dear. So another quick question. I keep hearing that venues are expanding and more strongly enforcing their exclusive services that must be delivered by their on-site partners. At the same time, the cost of these required partners is going up significantly. The net effect being a higher cost for venues and the required services for in-person events in 2021 and 2022 versus 2019. Are you seeing this trend for events you're supporting producing in 2021 and 2022?
We are.
It's a lot. So, yeah.
We are. And so, it's a natural outgrowth of the downturn in the marketplace. So if you're running a convention center or a hotel and all of a sudden all of your event, dollars went away, all that revenue went away, there was a mad scramble to stay relevant and come up with services. So they started to do, a lot of these folks developed virtual platforms. We've seen that. We've seen other virtual services. They brought some services in-house that otherwise weren't being done. So what we think you're seeing is kind of the hangover of that effect. We do think longer term competition will win out. So 2, 3, 5 years from now, you'll be dealing with a location and they'll say, well, you got to use our so-and-so. And you'll say, well, and I'm not using your location. They're going to come off that point, right? So they're going to still want the business. So as the market comes back, we think that trend will go away. We think it's going to be with us for 12 to 18 months, where folks are going to be asking you. That said, if you're on the brand side or on the agency side, everything's negotiable, and it always is. And if you're going to spend, $1 million on an event at a hotel and they want an extra 50,000 for X, negotiate your way out of it. Say, I'll spend $1 million because you're where I want to be, but I'm bringing my own partner to do X, Y, and Z. So they can ask, but you'll just have to make that decision in that negotiation as you go. And we think right now it's prevalent in the market, but over the next, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, that's going to soften a little bit as we get back to live.
Great. Ever changing. How should you plan for attendees who may not follow your safety protocols to the exact letter, e.g. takes off masks during presentations, that type of thing?
Sure. So obviously we've seen a lot of controversy around some of the regulations and guidelines. And ultimately it's the same way you would handle that situation before COVID, when someone was being disruptive or wasn't kind of following along. It's probably someone approaching them in a quiet way with some sort of security and asking them to comply. And if they don't comply, asking them to vacate. And it's never easy. And in, all of the years I've been in this business, I've only seen it happen a couple of times. I'm sure there will be a fair amount of it coming up, but it's making sure that your team is, and that goes back to that slide where I talked about kind of staff training your staff and risk mitigation. It's having it well-defined that how you're going to deal with it. Don't wait until the last minute when it happens and scramble to figure out how to solve that gentleman in the back corner who refuses to put his mask on. Talk through it, understand again what the brand and the expectations are around the audience, and plan for it, and bring in the folks who are experts at that and let them handle it for you.
Yeah, and I think clear expectations are key. Yeah. They know, they agree, they've signed something, they've checked the box. You've agreed to this, do you need to do this?
Yeah, and it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be moments.
Absolutely.
But
yes, discreet is good. Do you think events will ask for pre-event COVID tests? And what about vaccine passports?
Absolutely. It's absolutely coming. Maybe not every event, maybe not in Texas, maybe not in Florida, but absolutely we're going to have testing it up front. We're seeing all kinds of great technology like around touchless registration and testing before you get in, whether that's blood oxygen level or temperature and such. Definitely going to see some vaccine passports. We're seeing those popped up, and clients are asking about those. And again, it all goes back to that idea of like, good community management, making folks feel safe. And at the end of the day, if someone doesn't want to attend and the risk is too high, then they will not attend. So,
It's a choice.
we talk a little bit about, or even joke a little bit about vaccine passports, is the folks that are least likely to wear a mask were also the least likely folks to get a vaccine. So it's a very specific demographic. And so, again, thinking through that and mitigating, there's tons of great new technology, whether it's handheld cell phone or kiosk or otherwise scanning technologies that are now hitting the market that are very easy, and they're not in the way. We're seeing things with really great throughput, which is, again, if you've got 10,000 people rushing into your event, you need something with great throughput. So we're seeing those things hit the market. So it's exploring a little and finding out what's right for your brand and your event.
Great. Okay. What strategies, tactics are you seeing to increase digital engagement?
So
Hey, give us all your secrets.
Yeah, well, and it's basically just good digital marketing, right? So I don't have a laundry list of them because it's very specific to brand and audience and touch point. But that's where I kind of spoke a little bit about in the old world, pre-COVID, often the digital guys didn't talk that much to the event guys, right? It was basically the event folks had their agency and their partner, and there was some audience acquisition and some messaging and some content, and they kind of all handled it. My advice would be is go out and find either an agency, an experiential agency that really understands virtual and digital, or find a digital agency that's leaked into experiential. And we've seen a ton of that in the marketplace, where agencies that are really good at digital have started to dabble in virtual events, and agencies that were really good at live have really learned how to do virtual events. So as you're expanding beyond not only your own team, your core team in both events, event marketing and digital marketing, looking for a partner that has the right type of experience for both will really help kind of drive success. Specific strategies and tactics, best practices are best practices.
That's a whole other discussion.
I don't carry a laundry list with me, but if anybody wants to call, I'm happy to have that conversation with them.
So this is, you kind of touched on this, but this is getting down to another area of getting into your personal space, so to speak. Do you think organizers are going to start asking, having a checkbox, or getting, kind of what you said before about vaccinated? Have you been vaccinated? Is a checkbox in the registration? And that kind of can get into some legalities on some items here. And then also, do you think if this continues the path that we're going, do you think we'll only allow vaccinated attendees?
I think the market will determine that, in that some events will be very conservative and they will ask and only allow. I think other events will ask but allow, and then still others won't ask at all. And I think you have to make the right choice for your brand and your audience and whatever the market moment is. Because right now, in 3 or 4 months, I think those kind of questions are going to be natural, and maybe a year from now they won't be, or people won't care, and it'll just be a checkbox on a form. So I really think it is event to event. If you're asking me personally, I think you should ask, and I think folks that are vaccinated should be welcomed in, and folks that aren't vaccinated, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to keep anyone out, and I don't want to make it a political conversation. But one of the interesting things we've seen in some of the more B2C venues is they're actually partitioning the audience. So there's a vaccinated section and a non-vaccinated, or I don't want to answer that question section. And so that's obviously harder to do at a live event that isn't kind of in a stadium or doesn't have separate. But I think you really have to think through that stuff. I don't know that there's any one easy.
Yeah, and someone just brought up a really great question, because there are some legit reasons why people cannot get that vaccination. Yeah. So you don't want to, exclude them just because they just can't do it.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother discussion that has to come up or have it.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. There will be people that for religious or medical reasons will never get vaccinated, and that's perfectly okay and reasonable. And certainly personal choice too. And you obviously don't want to exclude those people. And so it's really developing that strategy where you can keep folks safe, but also allow for the most possible adoption or attendees and the such. And that's going to be one of the core challenges we all face as an industry as we get back to. The worst thing that can happen is we don't think about it and someone hosts an event and it makes the news for the wrong reasons. And that will put not only that brand or host organizer, set them back, but also our community and our entire industry. So really important to think through those things and make some, probably difficult decisions.
Great. Wow. So we've had some great questions. Are there any other questions? We have probably room for one more, and then we should probably get going. And I'm just monitoring this here right now. In the meantime, I will, let's see. I don't see anything right now. So thank you so much, John. What a lot of great content. And for those of you that didn't hear me from before, we will have this on CEMA Online. It will be ready for you, and his presentation will also be on there. It'll be on-demand learning area in the CEMA Online website. So thank you all again very much. And John, thank you. This has been fabulous. I'm going to have to refer back to some of the things that you just brought up and get you thinking. And we'll see you, of course, in July in Arizona, which we're very excited to have you. And all of you, remember, we are going to have registration go live next week for CEMA Summit 2021. It will be live, or hybrid, I should say. And we look forward to seeing all of you in person. I also want to say that we will be having a live town hall on May 25th, if I remember correctly. I will be monitoring, or a panelist in Las Vegas. So we'll have that live webinar going on May 25th. So looking forward to seeing all of you then. And if you have any questions, oh, and Olga always has to remind me, if you have not renewed your membership, please do so ASAP, so we can make sure you get all this amazing content that we have in store for you in the next few months. So there it is, May 25th at 11 a.m. live from Caesar's Palace. So we will be from Tales from the Road back to live. So with that being said, thank you, my friend. Always great to see you and spend time with you. Thank all of you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you in the future, and have a fabulous rest of the Wednesday. Oh, happy Cinco de Mayo.
Happy Cinco.
Bye.